I'm Flavia Zimmerman from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us Professor Stephen Smith. Professor Stephen Smith is going to give us some remarks about the recent event promoted by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, together with the Australian Institute of International Affairs, on the Australian-Indonesian dialogue. Pleasure having you with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Our first question would be, could you please explain how the Indonesian-Australian relationship has bounced back from recent diplomatic tensions to the current affairs of dialogue and negotiations?
Well, I think the reason that the Australia-Indonesia relationship bounces back reasonably quickly from any of the difficulties that we've seen in the past, whether that's executions, whether that's allegations of espionage or spying, it bounces back because the fundamentals are very strong. There's a very close working relationship between key agencies, between departments, but also the non-government institutions and organisations, and the Indonesia-Australia dialogue is just one of any number of examples of long-standing institutions whose aim is to enhance and to develop the Australia-Indonesia relationship. So I think we bounce back because there's a fundamental understanding amongst key people in Indonesia and Australia that this relationship is very important. And in very many respects, it's more important, the relationship is now more important to Australia than it is necessarily to Indonesia. But continuing to develop these cultural links, the education links, the people-to-people links, they are really important to make sure that we do withstand, as neighbours always have to withstand, incidents and difficulties which emerge from time to time in the relationship.
Wonderful. Stephen, how strong, in your opinion, is the relationship Australian-Indonesian at the moment?
Well, I think it's very strong. Indeed, I think in very many respects it's the strongest it's been. Too many people focus on the difficulties and the particular incidences that we have. Not enough people, including Australians in particular, not enough people focus on the things that we do together, the ongoing strength of the relationship, how important we are one to the other, both in a geographic, geostrategic sense, in an economic sense. So I think always with Australia-Indonesia relationship, you're always better off looking to the future rather than dwelling on the difficulties of the past. Incidents occur, we deal with them, we move on, and that's been seen most recently with the recent difficulties related to allegations of spying, but also the executions where Australia and Indonesia have a different point of view. But I think it's much more valuable for all of us to focus on what can Australia and Indonesia do in new areas of the economy, in the digital economy, in new technology, in research. Indonesians and Australians are both great early adopters of new technology. Australians have great expertise in developing services, and Indonesia, we have a market which is 10 times at least bigger than the market we have in Australia. So if we focus on the potential for collaboration, the things that we can do together, new and emerging areas of interest, whether it's the arts, whether it's digital technology and research, whether it's furniture, whether it's fashion, all of these things are new opportunities for us. We should dwell on those, not dwell on the difficulties of the past.
Absolutely, Stephen. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Now, could you please just expand a little bit more the traditional relationship that Australia and Indonesia had on regards to student interchange and the Colombo Plan, and how it has shaped and strengthened the Australian-Indonesian dialogue?
Well, in very many respects, the Colombo Plan is one of the best things that Australia ever did in terms of its foreign and international relations. So in Western Australia, for example, where we are here at the University of Western Australia, thousands of students came from Southeast Asia, were educated here, and they went back to their own countries, ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and they became ambassadors for Australia. So the great strength of investing in Indonesian students coming to Australia, whether that's for secondary school, whether it's for vocational education and training, whether it's for university, all of these things end up with young Indonesians going back to Indonesia, better educated, but being ambassadors for Australia. And one of the challenges for Australia is that we now need to start sending more young Australian students to Indonesia, particularly undergraduate and postgraduate level. Send young Australians to Indonesia so that when they come back to Australia, they're advocates and they're ambassadors for the Australia-Indonesia relationship, and they help educate Australians more generally about the attitude and approach and culture of Indonesians, so that we learn and get a better understanding of Indonesian culture and the vast differences that they have with us, and make that a strength, not a weakness. So the new Colombo plan, which is, in my view, a very good initiative, that has the potential to see many more young Australians studying not just in Indonesia but throughout our region, and that's an unambiguously good thing.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think the new Colombo plan might also impact Australia as being a more diverse and multicultural nation?
Well, I think it sends, in terms of the Australia-Indonesia relationship, it sends a very good signal to Indonesia. It says Australia is not just interested in our students coming to Australia to study, but Australia is interested enough in Indonesia to send its students to Indonesia. And everyone knows the statistics in Australia about the decline in the number of Australian students who are studying Indonesia, who are learning Bahasa. But sending our own students to Indonesia, firstly, it's the best way for young Australians to learn about Indonesia. But it does send a very strong signal to Indonesia that we regard this relationship as absolutely imperative, as very important. So that's the new program has got great opportunity and potential on that side. And from an Australian point of view, whether it's young students going to other countries in ASEAN, to South Asia or to North Asia, these are all good things from Australia's international relations and foreign policy perspective.
Mm. And do you think this would also not only send signals that Australia has a posture of respect to other nations in the region, but that also Australia may become a medium power and more influential with other countries in Southeast Asia and in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, well, it's very important that Australia maximises its relationship with ASEAN as an institution and individual countries in ASEAN. And we have, in a sense, a unique history. We're a Western democratic country in the midst of the Indo-Pacific. So our challenge is to make sure that we not only understand the importance of the economic relationship that we can have with South Asia, with Southeast Asia and North Asia, but understand that to maximise that side of the relationship, we also have to maximise our understanding of different cultures, different languages, different values sometimes, and different virtues. And the best way for young Australians to learn about whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's Indonesia, is to go there and to study, ideally to work there for a period of time. And in the old days, when if you look back into Australia's history, these were things which Australians did when our primary relationship was with the United Kingdom, and subsequently when our primary relationship was with the United States. Thousands of young Australians would go to the United Kingdom or to the United States to study and to work. Now, our challenge is to make sure that subsequent generations are going to Indonesia to study and work. They're going to Delhi and parts of India to study and work, going to China and Japan and the Republic of Korea, and to other parts in ASEAN. This is the great challenge for us, to maximise the potential that we have in those relationships. The truth is, we've done a good job to date. We were ASEAN's first dialogue partner back in the 1960s. We've worked very hard to help establish the East Asia Summit, which is a very crucial part of the regional architecture now. So we've done pretty well, but there are significant challenges ahead of us, and getting our relationship for the future with Indonesia right is really one of those key challenges. And that's why the new Colombo plan, enhancing the cultural links, artistic links, enhancing the business and investment links, these are all things which lead to growing a much better relationship into the future with Indonesia.
Fascinating, Stephen. Thank you so much. And now, on regards to the new Indonesian administration, the Widodo administration, how would you compare the approach that Widodo has to the new Colombo plan and to strengthening the Indonesian-Australian dialogue with the previous administration, the Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono?
Well, I think in some respects, Australia was spoiled by President Yudhoyono. When he came to Australia on his last or second last visit and he addressed the Australian Parliament, I thought for the first time that Australians saw through that address the modern Indonesia. And this was a fantastic thing. It was a great speech, a great visit, and really sent a very strong signal that Australians needed to start to understand better the modern Indonesia. With President Jokowi, we have for the first time a president democratically elected after the democratic election twice of a predecessor. So in the first instance, he solidifies and consolidates Indonesian democracy, and that's a great thing. But it's not uncommon for new prime ministers or new presidents in whatever country they are, these days with the possible exception of the United States and China, to in the first instance to focus on domestic matters. We saw SBY at the end of 2 terms of his presidency where he had helped guide Indonesia from being a regional power or a regionally significant country to the start of Indonesia's global significance. And as President Jokowi's time in office advances, I think we will start to see him becoming more noticeable, more noticed and more active in the international forum, not just in ASEAN, but in the G20, United Nations. So you've already seen him starting to look further afield from purely domestic matters to regional and international matters. So I think in the end he'll become an international statesman, just as we've seen historically Australian Prime Ministers start off focusing on matters domestic, but in the end they understand that the job is not just a domestic one, it's also a regional one and a global one, and you have to start playing your part and playing your role regionally and globally.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Also, there are some claims that the Indonesian economy might become the 4th economy in the world, ahead of the United States, China and India in possibly 2 or 3 decades from now. And the weight of the Indonesian economy is really thriving in the region. How do you think Australia could maximize this new emerging market? And if you please, could you please also explain the trade partnerships that currently we have in place and what Australia is envisioning for the near future with Indonesia?
Well, I think this is really the most significant question and the most important challenge that Australia faces in its relationship with Indonesia. Currently, Indonesia and Australia are both in the G20, so we're both strong economies, and Australia traditionally comes in at economy number 13, 14 or 15. We're a small population country, so we're an island continent, an island country, small population, large landmass. And we have grown our prosperity by being 2 things, by being a great trading nation and being an attractive place for overseas direct foreign investment, for overseas capital investment. So our trade starts off in gold and wheat and wool, and now we see it in iron ore, liquefied natural gas, so resources and petroleum products, but also we see it most importantly in advanced manufactured technologies and in services. So our ingenuity, our expertise, our skill and capacity as a nation is now our great future as a trading nation. Indonesia, on the other hand, yes, it's now in the G20, its economy is growing, but it's got a population of 250 to 350 million people. So it's a very significant population. And all of the projections, as you quite rightly say, have Indonesia being in either the top 4 or the top 5 economies by the time we get to 2050. So the challenge for Australia is that traditionally we've seen ourselves as being a bigger economy and a stronger economy. And we've seen historically Indonesia as either being an undeveloped economy or a developing economy. In the blink of an eye, Indonesia's economy is going to be larger than ours, bigger than ours. And so at 2050, you can see Indonesia being in the top four, China, US, India and Indonesia, and you can see Australia being in the G20, but you can also see Australia slipping down to the G30 as other larger population countries move from being undeveloped economies to developing economies to thriving significant economies. So we can't afford to slip too far down the chain, nor can we afford to not have the next wave of direct foreign investment. Historically, we've seen foreign investment come from the United Kingdom, from the United States, then post-World War II. Yes, we've seen it continue from the UK and the European Union, from the United States, but also from Japan and Korea and now China. The next great wave of overseas direct foreign investment, in my view, will come from Indonesia and from India. So unless Australia has positioned itself so that it is an attractive place for direct foreign investment from Indonesia, we will miss out on one of the things which has always made us a prosperous country, overseas direct capital investment. And so at the moment we know other economies from North Asia, Japan, China, Korea, North America, Europe, so economies to our north, they're all actively engaged with Indonesia economically, trying to make sure that they are also destinations for that direct capital investment. Australia has to make sure that it's also seen as a destination for Indonesian foreign investment. And if we're not a destination, that will be to our economic loss. It'll be to the loss of our prosperity. And so we need to make sure that now we're right in there, that we're saying to Indonesia, we want to enhance our trade, and we want to do that through signing up for what we call AIIA, for our Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So we want to sign up for that. That'll be a good thing. That'll add to the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement that we have. But also we want now to start Indonesia thinking about having supply chains with Australia so that it makes sense for Australia and Indonesia to engage in economic opportunities. On cattle, for example, we're a traditional supplier of live cattle for beef for Indonesia. If we can encourage Indonesian investment into our supply chains in the beef industry, then we'll have a collaborated industry which is important both to Australia and Indonesia, where we both got shared investments. And it's not just cattle that can provide an opportunity. There are a whole range of products and services where this can be a really good thing. And here it's where Australia, by the time Indonesia is the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world, it can get along fine with a modest investment in Australia. But Australia can't get along fine in 2050 with Indonesia only having a modest investment in us. So in a sense, we're now the economic mendicant. We're now the economic partner who has to go to Indonesia and say, we need you to start focusing on us. And we can only do that by wearing out the street leather in Jakarta, Yogyakarta and Surabaya, other parts of the Indonesian economy, and making the point that we want to be a capital partner. And I think this is the most significant challenge for Australia. And coming as we do from Western Australia, it is really essential that Western Australia starts to portray itself as the gateway to Indonesia for the rest of Australia. Otherwise, Western Australia runs the risk of missing out entirely as the countries to our north, Indonesia in particular, but also Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand, as countries to our north become deeply significant economies. So it's a crucial thing for Australia, and it's an absolutely essential matter for Western Australia to get that economic, trade, and most importantly, investment relationship right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Just mind-boggling and fascinating to listen to your explanation on the future developments and economic developments of Australia and Indonesia. Now, on regards to this new economic partnership between Australia and Indonesia, how do you think it might impact the geopolitical considerations in the Indo-Pacific, and how China and India may perceive a growing economic dialogue between Indonesians and Australians?
Well, I think both China and India will see Australia's relationship and further developing a trade and investment relationship will just be seen as a natural thing to do. We're direct neighbours. Indonesia is closer to mainland Australia than a plane flight from Melbourne to Sydney. So no one's going to be surprised that Indonesia and Australia have a relationship. What Australia wants to do is to make sure that that is a first-class relationship, not just on a strategic sense, on a national security sense, but also on an economic, trade and investment sense. So no one's going to be surprised by that. India, I think, will welcome a heightening or a upping of the threshold of the relationship between Australia and Indonesia, because as India itself grows to being a great power, its sphere of influence will be the Indian Ocean. And as we've said of Indonesia, in the blink of an eye by 2050, we expect it to be a top 4 economy. We know at the moment we've got 2 great global powers, the United States and China. Well, just as the United States and China and our region, the west of the world, gets used to that change in the global space, India will also rise as a great power. So a country of 1.2 billion people, by the time we get to 2050, we'll be starting to adjust to how does the world now adjust to 3 great powers, United States, China and India. And India will become much more interested in the Indian Ocean itself and the Indian Ocean Rim and the Indian Ocean Arc. So the fact that India, Indonesia and Australia are all significant members of AIIA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, is a good thing. In recent years, India, Australia and Indonesia have all been chairs of that association. So developing that regional architecture is a good thing. So I think India will warmly welcome the thriving of the Australia-Indonesia relationship, because it's Indian Ocean. It's the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific. China won't be surprised, but China is also active in seeking to engage Indonesia and the rest of ASEAN in an economic and a strategic relationship. So none of these things are surprises. I think the key thing, though, for Australia is that if we don't develop the sort of relationship that I've described with Indonesia, and the same applies to India, if we don't develop that relationship, then we'll be the losers. Not Indonesia, not China, not India. It'll be Australia who are the losers of economic prosperity as a consequence of not getting the relationship right from now over the next 25 to 30 years.
Absolutely. Wonderful to listen your remarks, Stephen. And just to wrap it up, I was wondering about the traditional defense partnership that Australia has with the US, and with new emerging powers in the Indo-Pacific. Australia positions itself in a situation that it does need to strengthen relationships with Indonesia, India and China. And how do you think the United States will perceive the shift in power in the region, and the fact that even though Australia is still very much aligned militarily with the United States, but Australia now tends to position itself in a way that is reaching out to other countries in the region, and how it might affect the relationship with the United States as well?
Well, it won't affect, in my view, the relationship with the United States at all. I mean, the United States is not silly. It knows that a country like Australia is clearly going to have economic and strategic relationships with countries in its part of the world. And it won't surprise China either. And our relationship with Indonesia is something which the United States values. When I was once a minister, pretty much on every occasion you had a serious conversation with a United States counterpart. Questions about Indonesia would arise. So our knowledge of Indonesia, our relationship with Indonesia is valued and respected by the United States. So none of these things are surprises. In terms of the defence to defence, the military to military, the strategic to the strategic relationship that Australia has with Indonesia, this is one of the great strengths which helps to withstand those political and diplomatic incidences that we spoke about earlier. It's one of the things that continues, and Indeed, these days it's much better developed than it has been in recent times. So when you look at the trappings of our relationship, when you look at what does Australia and Indonesia now do on a regular basis, every year the President and the Prime Minister have a formal summit. Every year the foreign ministers and the defence ministers meet together in the 2+2 format. Every year the foreign ministers meet together formally, the defence ministers meet together formally. And that's in addition to all of the things that we do in our Australia and ASEAN relationship, our Australia and East Asia Summit relationship, our G20 relationship. But underneath all of that, you've got significant agency to agency and department to department relationships. So you've got a significant ongoing relationship with the Australian Defence Force and the Indonesian Defence Force. You've got a significant relationship with the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Kemlu, the Indonesian Ministry. You've got a significant now, after the difficulty we had on the intelligence front, a significant relationship now, a cooperative agreement on that. And you've got defence cooperation agreements. All of these things underpinned by the Lombok Treaty, which we signed up a few years ago. So it's the strength of these agency-to-agency relationships, and it's not just military or defence. You also find it in the maritime space, in the fisheries space. So there are a whole range of institutional relationships which go on. And there's also significantly a number of alumni organisations and institutions, and the best one that I'm aware of is the defence alumni. So AIIA, the Indonesian defence alumni, essentially puts together all of the Indonesian military and defence personnel who've studied or trained in Australia. And this is now a significant institution for Australia and Indonesians to bounce off ideas on our military to military and defence to defence relationship. It's now significant numbers. Its membership is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. And it's one of those informal institutional arrangements that is used to enhance and bolster the relationship. And it plays an important role. So Australia and Indonesia growing not just its economic, trade and investment relationship, but also continuing to grow its political relationship, its institutional relationship, its organisational relationship, whether that's maritime, whether it's intelligence, whether it's defence, whether it's students, whether it's alumni. All of these things help to get the relationship into the sort of place that we need to have it for the future. And no other country is going to be surprised by this. China's not going to be surprised. India won't be surprised. The United States won't be surprised. On the contrary, they think that we weren't doing our job for ourselves if we weren't doing it, because it's clearly in our national security interest, but also in our national economic interest to keep on developing these aspects of the relationship with Indonesia.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today, Stephen. Absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.